How's it going, everybody? Welcome back to another video of Infomesser. My name is Sharif. In today's video, we're continuing the intermediate MySQL series, and we're covering CTEs, which stands for Common Table Expressions. And this is going to be the final video of my intermediate SQL series. So if you haven't seen the other videos, please check them out. They'll be very much worth your time. So basically, a CTE is a temporary result set that you define at the beginning of your query by using the with keyword. And it helps you break complex SQL logic into smaller, cleaner, and easier to read parts. And instead of writing one giant messy query, you can create a named block of logic first and then query from that right away. And this is really useful in healthcare data because a lot of the times you're not just pulling simple lists. You might be summarizing patient populations, calculating averages, comparing risk groups, that kind of complicated stuff. And so CTEs make that process much easier to follow and honestly much more professional looking. So in this video, I'm going to show you the basic syntax, how to perform calculations inside of a CTE, how CTEs compare to subqueries, how to use CTEs in one statement, and why this is such an important skill if you want to become more comfortable and more confident with SQL. All right, let's start off with the basic syntax. And when you create a CTE, you always begin with the with keyword. So I'm going to write that right there. And then after that, you give your CTE a name, and then you use the as keyword followed by the parentheses. And then inside of those parentheses, you place a query that defines your temporary result set. So I'm going to call this patient overview. And keep in mind, when you name the CTE, you want to name it something meaningful because the whole point of a CTE is readability. You want other people to understand what your CTE is doing. And so in this case, I'm just doing a basic overview with the patient table. So that's why I'm calling it patient overview. But now, since I've gotten this part, I'm just going to add the open parentheses and then I'm going to write my table inside of this. So select, we're going to do a couple of columns, patient ID. Let's do age, years, payer, and we're going to do risk score. And then we want to select where that's coming from, which is the patient table and patients table. And then we're going to close this off with that parentheses. And then right after that, I want to write my main query. And in this case, I'm doing select star from patient overview. And as you can tell, this is the CTE that we gave this, the CTE name. So what I want you to notice here is that I create the CTE first and then I immediately query from it. That's a normal pattern that you'll see with CTEs. So let's go ahead and run this. Okay, and now as you can see, everything from this table is resulting in the columns that we defined inside of the parentheses. So you only get those 4 columns. So that's what a CTE is essentially doing. Another thing to keep in mind, this does not create a permanent table, and this is not being saved as a real table in the database. It's just a temporary name result set that exists for this statement only. Okay, now we're gonna do something that involves math, and if you like math, you're gonna like this one. So we're gonna do a little bit of advanced calculations inside of a CTE, and this is super simple. It's very similar to how you normally write a CTE. So we're gonna do with first, and this time we're gonna call it patient stats, and we're gonna do as right there, open parentheses. Then we're gonna write our query inside of that. So let's do select, and then we're gonna do average. We'll average out the age years column, give that a nice name, average age. This is our alias. Then we're gonna go to max. Let's see the max risk score as max risk score. And let's do the min risk score, which is the minimum. So I'm just gonna copy this, save some time here, and we'll call this min, and this part min as well. And then let's do one more column. We're gonna do the count column. We're gonna count every single thing, every single row. We're gonna do as total patients, and of course from this table, the patients table, as always. And then we're gonna close it off with the parentheses. And now do select star from that table name, the CTE name that we gave it. Let's copy that, and we're gonna paste that right there. So the reason why I'm doing this inside of a CTE is because I may want to package these metrics into a clean little result set first, and then query from that result set immediately after. Okay, let's go ahead and run this one. And there we go. Nice little result set. This right here is a great example of how a CTE can help you separate the logic of creating the summary from the logic of consuming the summary. And even though this query is still simple, this same pattern becomes extremely valuable once your logic gets more and more complex. All right, friends, this time we're going to build something that looks more like a healthcare analytics query. And if you're in love with the healthcare analytics field or healthcare in general like I am, this example is for you. This time, I'm going to be calling my CTE payer summary. So let's give it that name. Payer summary as open parentheses. Then let's indent that, make it look nice. Select, we're going to do payer. And then the reason why I'm doing payer is because I want to summarize the patient population by the payer. So I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to do count star. We're going to give it a name, patient count. And the reason why I'm doing that is because I want to get the count of number of patients in each payer category. And then I'll just add in a little bit more. Let's do age, years, give it a name, average age, and then let's do average risk score as average risk score. Let's call it that. And then we're going to do from our patients table. And for this one, we're going to have to do a group by because we're using the aggregate function over here, aggregates, 3 of them actually. So we're going to group by the one that is lonely. As I've explained in my past video of group by, that's how I like to explain it. You always get the lonely column, the group by, or columns if there's multiple. So we'll do group by payer right there, and we're simply going to close it off with the parentheses. So now we're going to write the main query, and that comes outside of the parentheses. So we're going to do select star from, and I want to select everything from payer summary. So I'm going to do that, which is the CTE name that we gave this, and then I'm going to order it by, actually, let's order it by the average risk score, and in descending order so that the pair groups with the highest average risk score appear first. All right, let's go ahead and run this and show you what this looks like. So now we're seeing the highest risk scores to the lowest. And this is the kind of thing that can be useful in healthcare because you might want to compare different populations and see which groups appear higher risk on average. Now we're going to compare CTEs with subqueries, and this is where a lot of people get lost. A lot of people, including myself when I was first starting out, I used to get confused a lot by CTEs and subqueries. I couldn't decide which one to use. I couldn't figure out which one was which, but I'll break it down for you. So what I already did right here is I wrote the CTE, and remember, CTE is always going to start off with a with, and then you're giving it a temporary name. So I've already defined the logic up top. I gave it a name, and then I query it from underneath. Now what we're going to do, we're going to write out the subquery version of this CTE, and you'll see that it's not really that different, and it's still going to often produce the same results. So I'm just going to take the inner query here, starting off from the parentheses, copy that, and let's give it a nice base. Just like that. We're just going to paste it, and let's bring this a little higher. So remember, when we start off by writing subqueries, we're going to do a select star from, and then inside, this is what we want to select from, the query that we're writing. So inside of this query, the select star, it's going to select everything inside of this. And then with subqueries, you always want to give them an alias. So we're going to do as, let's give this pair summary. And then we're going to do where, because in this CTE we defined this, we're going to do the same thing for this. So I'll just take that and then paste it right there. And there we go. So let's think about this from a functional standpoint. Both of these are going to give me the same output. So let's run this, because essentially they're really doing the same thing. You're selecting from this inner query right here. So we see the 3 columns, the ones that we defined right here. Now let's run the subquery and think about these results. Let's look at them and we're going to see same exact output. So in professional environments, a lot of people prefer CTEs when the logic gets very complex because they are easier to read, easier to format, and easier to debug. And a CTE lets you clearly separate your setup logic from your final query. A subquery, on the other hand, it can still be perfectly valid, but once the SQL gets bigger, it often starts to feel more cramped up, and it gets harder to follow. And just one more important detail, a CTE can only be used immediately after it's created, and you can't define it and then use it later in a completely separate query. You just can't do that. So it only exists for one statement. It's not a permanent table. Just keep that in mind. And actually, better yet, since we're on the topic of that, let me actually show you what happens when you break off a CTE and the fact that it is a temporary table. So we're gonna just take this CTE name that we gave this table and then paste it separately right here. We're gonna do select star from that table, and when I run it, it's gonna produce an error because it's not connected to that statement anymore. So that's why you just gotta remember, CTEs are not a replacement for actual permanent tables or views. They're just great for organization and doing something temporary. Okay, now we're going to move on to something a little bit more advanced, which is writing multiple CTEs in a single statement. And for this one, I'm going to be comparing 2 things, which is diabetes data and then CKD data, which is chronic kidney disease. And so it's going to be coming from the same table, but I'm just going to be using one CTE for the diabetes summary and then one CTE for the CKD summary. So I'll show you how that looks. We're going to start off with the with statement, and we're just going to call this one diabetes summary, and then as open parentheses, then of course we're going to write our query, the inner query. Let's do pair, because I want to count how many diabetic patients are in each pair group, and then I'm calculating the average risk score for those diabetic patients, so I'm going to need risk score as well. I'm going to do count first, we want to count all those patients as, let's do diabetes patients, and then we're going to do average risk score as, let's call it diabetes average risk. Okay, and now we're going to do the from patients. And I'm also going to do where diabetes equals 1, because in this table, when diabetes equals 1, that means that the person has diabetes. And if they equal 0 in that field, then they don't have it. And same goes for the CKD. And then we're going to do, of course, we got to do, let's capitalize that, or never mind, group by pair. And remember, it's the single alone column. It doesn't have the aggregate function. That's why we're grouping by pair. And then we're going to close this off. Then when you want to add another CTE, I already finished my first one. Since I want to add another CTE, I'm going to put the comma right there. And that comma is important because it tells SQL that I'm defining another CTE in that statement. And so now I'm going to start working on my second CTE, and this time we're going to call this one CKD summary. So let's call it CKD summary, and then of course an as right there, open parentheses, and then we're going to do, actually, let's just copy this whole thing, paste it right there, but this time we're going to call this CKD and CKD, but then we have to replace this. CKD equals 1. There we have it. So now I'm going to be calculating CKD related counts and then the average risk score by the pair. And then in the final query, once I close this off, you always have to open it and close it. Just remember it by that too. And then select. Now we're gonna do a couple columns that I'm gonna want in this. And so let's do payer diabetes patients because of that alias over there up top. And then we're gonna do this one as well, diabetes average risk. And we're also gonna do our CKD patients and CKD average risk right there. And then I'm gonna do from this first table, first CTE, diabetes summary, and let's call it, we have to give this one an alias because we're gonna be doing a join since we're using 2 CTEs. So let's just give it an alias of D, and then we're gonna do the CKD table as well, or CTE. So we're gonna do just a simple join CKD summary as C. We're gonna do on D.pair equals C.pair. We're gonna connect them by those, and of course order by, I'm gonna order it by the pair. But we're not done just yet. We have to put the alias in front of these tables. So we're gonna do D, and then we're gonna do D right there, because it's coming from this table, not to confuse you guys. And then these last two are gonna come from the CKD tables, which we identified as C. So we're gonna do C dot this, and that's it. That's the entire query. So now we're gonna actually run this, and there we go. That's what it looks like combining 2 CTEs. It's kind of like just using a join with 2 tables, but this time you're really breaking it down and calculating everything within. And so this is an example of a complex query, and it's really powerful pattern because in real world analysis, especially in healthcare, you often need to build multiple logical pieces first, and then you got to bring them together at the end, as we've seen with this query. Okay, as always, I'm gonna leave you off with some helpful tips because I know this was a lot of information. So first of all, always give your CTE a clear and meaningful name, and that helps both you and anybody else that's reading your SQL. Second, use CTEs when your query starts becoming very difficult to read. And that is one of the biggest reasons that they exist in the first place. Remember, when a query gets more and more complex, that's when you know it's time to use CTEs. Third, if you find yourself repeating the same logic or building layered logic in steps, a CTE can actually make your query a lot cleaner. And everybody appreciates a cleaner, easy to read query. And fourth, remember that CTEs are just temporary. They exist only for the statement that immediately follows them, so don't treat them like a permanent table. Alright everyone, that wraps up this video on CTEs in MySQL. Hopefully you feel a lot more comfortable with what CTEs are, how to use them, and why they're so useful for writing cleaner and more professional SQL. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if this helped you out, please make sure to like, subscribe, and keep following along because this is the last video in my intermediate SQL series. So go ahead, check out the other SQL videos because they'll truly help you out. And like I said before, they'll be worth your time. Also, join my newsletter where I cover healthcare analytics, health informatics, health tech, and AI in healthcare to help you break in and level up your career. And I'll also put all the queries from this video in my GitHub page where I'll link down below. Again, guys, my name is Sharif. This is Infomesser, and stay tuned for my next video.